Dysfunction. So this video has been a long time coming and coalesces my experience, indeed our experience, with our last N customers, none of whom will be mentioned. And it's an amalgamation of almost a lifetime's worth of observation on the subject about what makes some companies' IT organizations more effective than others. I apologize for the length in advance, but it is a topic, if it's to be covered, must be covered with a reasonable amount of detail. So some prerequisites. If you are a follower of this channel, you'll realize that my fellows and I are quite seized with S.M.A.R.T. We're also seized with the idea that you need to measure outcomes and not process. We've spoken about that in a number of videos. And for all the times I say it, I still get comments on the videos or on the rest of the channel, and people don't understand what I mean by that. We do have a nice video about DORA that explains about outcomes versus process, and that's a good read. We'll refer to it later on. Some golden rules. I think the first thing most IT people need to sort of really grab onto is that no sane business wants IT. It is a necessary thing to have in order to be competitive, right? In order to be functional. It's almost unthinkable that a modern business wouldn't have a website and email and all of the other accoutrements and office suite, and that they wouldn't do a certain amount of some development or customization of packaged software. But at the end of the day, those things very rarely make money. In some cases, they can save money, but usually what they're doing is to manage risk. There's a huge amount of risk as an organization to not having email. There are occasionally pieces of software that, while they don't make money, they make the process of their business more effective, and so they're useful. And on rare occasions, they make money. Now, this observation is about companies whose primary business is not software, right? So I'm not talking about Microsoft, where I've worked. I'm not talking about, Google or any of those other places. I'm talking about perfectly regular businesses whose purpose in life is to deliver products and services to customers and who need but don't necessarily want IT. So there's a couple of correlations that goes with that. Things that, as IT people, we owe the business as their fiduciaries to focus on. For example, the adherence to the Pareto rule, particularly, I think the unsubstantiated but feels like it's true observation that the first 80% costs 80% and the second 20% costs 80%. I'm not sure that's backed up by actual numbers, but it feels right? So generally speaking, whenever we're doing anything, we want to think Pareto. Like, does this do enough to get through the major problems? Just because it doesn't do everything is no reason to not do it. And particularly, there's a disease that I've spoken about in other videos called best-of-breed disease, where you end up with three somethings that you try to keep in sync because in the aggregate, they do 100%. But in doing that, we've probably broken the fundamental reasons, which are make money, save money, manage risk. And chasing the bottom 20% is almost never, ever, ever useful, not in the 40 some odd years I've been doing this. The other thing is from the IT point of view, as part of our fiduciary duty to the business, and we do have one, and some IT people think we don't, but we should, is to ask the question, how does it end? In fact, a lot of things in the universe would be a lot better if every human being on Earth, when considering any decision, would stop and ask the phrase, how does it end? So if you can't define success criteria or find a way to measure the again, don't measure the process, measure the outcome, and come up with a conclusion about whether or not this was a good thing or a bad thing, then you really haven't asked and answered the question, how does it end? And that's where things get terribly messy, go pear-shaped, cost a ton of money and aggravation, and in some cases actually cause your best and brightest people to smart size themselves out of your organization. Smart sizing, of course, is that thing that occurs when you narc off the people who provide the most value and they leave. You have to know the cost-benefit trade-off, and I hate to say it, but but I mean, a lot of things, the business says we need this XYZ, and we come up with a thing, but no one ever stops to really look at the economics. And if the business was truly acquainted with the economics, which they almost never are, A, they wouldn't get sticker shock, and B, they could make an intelligent decision about that make money, save money, manage risk reason that we'll go on about. It's amazing how often in every week one of us will be in a meeting and say, does it make money, save money, or manage risk? As a, explain to me what the how does it end part, and is it economically viable? The other thing is just overbuilding. People overbuild things either because they think that something's going to be needed, or they think that if they don't, it's somehow less than professional. But in fact, that almost never is a good strategy. And then for packaged software, and we see this happening all the time with all sorts of packaged software. People purchase something after some sort of a process of investigation and in trade-offs, and then somebody makes a deal on the golf course and you get this piece of packaged software, which has absolutely nothing to do with the selection process, criteria, or value provided. Again, the reasons are make money, save money, manage risk. And so the thing is that people want to bend the packaged software to their will. Instead of asking, how can we get the outcomes, not the process, the out that we want using the software with the minimum amount of customizations humanly possible. And if you go completely crazy, you'll find that you're unable to upgrade or patch your software, which makes your organization vulnerable or increasingly ineffective as time goes on. So that's the first set. Here's the most important one. IT in a company that's, not Microsoft, not Google, but, right, is 100% customer service role. Who are we serving? The business. And we'll drill into that. But if you're in IT and you don't wake up in the morning and go, today I'm going to remember I'm in a customer service role and I have a fiduciary duty to the business, you're not going to go into your day with the right set of attitudes, criteria, etc. There are people in IT that I have talked to who don't believe they're in a customer service. They firmly believe that they know best about everything and they don't have to listen to anybody else's outside opinion. And they make decisions and they do things and, they know best. And that is not a healthy attitude if you really are going to serve the purpose of the business. It's just, I don't know how else to say it. So, based on that, right, what are the priorities of IT? Well, providing customer service to the people in the business who generate revenue. And revenue is great, but profit's better. Revenue just means you get some dollars in the door. Profit means that the amount that you make exceeds that amount that you spent. It follows that the IT staff that are closest to the delivery of business value are the most important people that everyone else should be in service of. People who make software for the business, operate software for the business, and enforce the rules for the business, e.g. the compliance and other organizations. We'll talk about them in a bit. And so I'll say it again, if a plurality of the people in the IT organization do not believe they're in a customer service role, then that is a dysfunction that needs to be addressed and adjusted. I don't know any other way to put it. And sometimes that's just a matter of reorienting people to their role and where it belongs in the overall strategy of the business. And sometimes it is potentially changing the ill-fitting parts for parts that fit better. I'd rather have someone in the organization who generally believes they're in the customer service role, who has just enough knowledge to know when to ask for help, than someone who thinks they're all that and doesn't see themselves in a customer service. And I'll point out, right, that the only people who are really empowered by the organization of corporations themselves to have an opinion about the effectiveness of IT are not in IT, right? They're the chief financial officer. They're the chief compliance officer. Like, are we doing stuff okay? Are we going to get, nailed? And overall, the chief executive officer, right? The CEO has these goals of things they want the business to do. We want to sell more of these widgets. We want to, make sure that our feedback is getting into our product design, and so our products get better. We want to make sure that we deliver service with these guide rails, right? They set the strategy for the organization, and at the end of a year, they have to look back on all the contributors and assess the outcomes against the costs and benefits. And the CEO gets the last word. Notice the CIO's not in the judgment area. They are in the making sure it happens area. For example, the CIO, the CDO, Chief Data Operator, the CTO, Chief Technology Officer, are all in service of the business goals. So they're supposed to take the business goals, break them down, and make sure that the IT organization is delivering against that. They're not an end to themselves, right? They're important key managers in IT, but their focus should be on outcomes. Separation of duties. I am versed, but not expert in this topic. But this is what I have learned from those individuals who truly are, right? Who know about GAAP and corporate governance and ISO and SOX and all the important things, right? This is what I have learned, is that the people who make or operate things don't get the last word on evaluation of the success, the outcome, right? And that includes testing, security, compliance, business usefulness, and success criteria should all be measured by people who are not in the make and operate universe, right? Those two groups balance each other, because the group that makes and operates things is trying to achieve the business goals, right? Because they have direction from, down the food chain. And the people who are measuring the outcomes of that are in a parallel organization, and that's how it should be. And so what follows from that is that there needs to be production change control. It's a production release board or whatever. But, they need to operate as a check on the desire to ship too aggressively or make large changes that could have been decomposed without sufficient, testing and validation or whatever, right? They need to act as a gate. And I am not a big fan of gates. I think gates get in the way. But this is an immutable gate. I don't think you can be successful at delivering business value in IT without some organization, lease management board, whatever you want to call it, that controls whether stuff can be changed in production, that it can affect actual end users. And that organization serves as a proxy for the senior IT management and ultimately the CIO. So their fiduciary duty is to make sure that they act as a check against the balance of people who are trying to get things done without getting in the way. But if they see something that is unwise, they are usually the last realm of defense before something crazier or not planned sufficiently gets done. Dysfunction category. Okay, again, this is our life experience. I got together with my friends and I, who often contribute ideas for videos, but they decline to deliver them. That's not their thing. But they say, make a video about this, and then we talk about what this is and what we should say about it. Make sense? So this is our best attempt to take an incredibly huge and complicated subject in this 30-plus minute video and winnow it down to the things that you can laser focus on to start. So the big three things we want to maximize is culture, which affects retention, it affects quality, it affects the tempo of delivery. You've heard about me talk about tempo and risk a lot. It is a risk managed in a balanced sort of way. The actual organization itself, how it's organized, what it thinks its charter is, and not in one of those crazy, business value, empty noise PowerPoints from hell. And yes, I see the irony here. Thank you. But actually, how can we organize the people into groups to get the most throughput while managing the risk? And then lastly, does everybody in the thing know what outcomes they are responsible for and how those will be measured, and then, how to maximize positive outcome, right? So if we can get a handle on those three things, I think it is the first step. And there was quite some discussion about which of these were most important. I voted for outcomes because I always vote for outcomes. But a lot of my peers who've been doing this as long as I have, plus or minus, thought that culture was important. And then the people who are in the business consulting same space, that are my friends, that are about, how do you maximize culture and outcomes? And they realize that organization has a strong component in that, and so they voted for organization. So these are the three we settled on after a starting list. Culture. If you are in an organization and you're at, the sharp end, where you're actually trying to deliver business value directly, and you find yourself unable to spin up a POC to prove, to see, should we do it this way or that way? So by POCs, I mean, and product evaluations, just anything that's a bake-off, to answer the question, if we did it this way, would it work, and what are the pros and cons? If you can't just spin one of those up and at the end of 3 weeks have an answer, then there's way too much impedance between you and it. 99% of the time. 1% of the time, it turns out the problem is bigger, scarier, and harder to do in 3 weeks than we thought. And that's okay, but it is incredibly, vanishingly rare. This is one of the few things all of us agreed on was, it's not the technology, it's the people. And people make process, and process makes impedance. So there's that. And then we need a culture that about trust but verify, right? We want to enable people to self-service, self-actuate, but we need an audit trail. We're in a business, right? There are security considerations. There are, whatever, compliance considerations. So we should default to self-service and transparency, but we should balance that by having an audit trail that's actually looked at to see if we've gone a bridge too far and then rein people back. I would much rather enable the 9 out of 10 use cases where on their own initiative they get something done and it doesn't do any harm. And part of that is to enable a sandbox culture, and we'll get into that. But then the 1 out of 10 case, which I think is a huge overestimation, but my peers insist that's the number, where someone does something so ill-advised that it actually has the potential to impact end users or production, right? And then we learn more from failure. And if the failure was based on, people doing the right thing and getting input and doing testing and whatever, and then we got it into production and it didn't work. I mean, that happens, right? People shouldn't live in fear of that they'll lose their jobs. Unless, of course, it was one, right? They didn't get feedback. They didn't do any testing. They didn't have a rollback plan or a compensation plan or whatever. Because that is professional malpractice and it's wanton. And yes, we should fire people for that. Speaking of self-service, here's some things that absolutely should be self-service. By the way, not a complete list again, right? These are just 5 pet peeves our team came up with. Installing approved software. It just should be a no-brainer. You shouldn't have to ask anybody or whatever. If it costs less than 10 hours in an employee's time and is going to save that over a year, then you shouldn't require an approval, even if it costs money. You should be able to just set up a new Git instance using a template and set up some PR and repository rules as a team, all on your own. Most document trees should be readable by anybody. For whatever reason, one of the big red flags is an organization, little subunit will say, I want you to check this out on our wiki or whatever. And A, they don't tell you where it is. And B, when you get there, you're not allowed to read it. Okay, that's dysfunction. It's a sign of siloing, and siloing is horrible. Set up build and release pipelines. You should be able to self-service those. I'm going to propose that you have embedded DevOps later on. This is the sort of thing that those people should be entrusted to do. And again, they'd start from an approved template or pattern, and then the only time we really should have authorization if it is ultimately an upper environment, stage or prod. And then, you should be able to run software if it requires elevation. If you have some sort of guarding technology like beyond trust, right? Access managers or, elevated privilege managers or whatever you want to call them, right out of the box, they come with an enormous whitelist of software they know to be safe. They come with a big list of things that are for sure no bueno. And then they have optional things that you can just snap in wholesale. Like if you don't allow network exploration tools except if you're in a particular role. And I'll mention our personal favorite, Wireshark. We've been told no on Wireshark a lot. And yet they're willing to endure long outages which cost, gazillions of dollars per second squared. And we could have solved the problem by getting the temporary permission to run Wireshark for a particular scenario that's gated, and then being allowed to, and then having it, ripped off our machine automatically. That would be perfectly fine with me and pretty much anybody else. But, at 3 a.m. when you need it, you need it. And so having an automated system that trusts but verifies. And again, if you're going to have auditing, someone's got to look at it. And if it's novel or whatever, you might ping the person and ask them why it's, they're using XYZ instead of PDQ. Or if XYZ is completely novel, is it something that they think other people might benefit from? Notepad++, high on the list of things. WinDiff, all kinds of things that aren't standard. Super helpful in that regard. And so you have a fluid, trust but verify way of adding things. And likewise, if you find that somebody installed something that turned out to be no bueno, particularly if your endpoint management software goes, then, those should be blacklisted. They shouldn't even be allowed to run. But in the middle, right, is flexibility. And again, trust but verify. If you don't trust the people writing your business software that's going into production and actually operating your business, there's something hugely dysfunctional there. I bet it's not them. I bet it's you. We fax over opinions, teach people how to fight fair. One of the things that is being taught now, because sadly, workplace violence is increasingly a thing, is conflict de-escalation. That is a skill I think is well worth investing, at least in your leader cadre. But, if it's cheap, maybe let everybody learn it if they want. Make it required at a certain place and optional lower down. I think you'll be happier. And then just have a set of rules about, how to resolve design conflicts or technology conflicts, right? And, value statements like, in the past I used this for this and here are the pros and cons, over, well, this one is shiny, let's use it, and it'd be good resume candy. Be wary of anyone who proposes things just so they can get it on their resume. And if it's shiny and they can't explain why it's shiny, then that's the only reason they're doing it. If you can't articulate the use cases and anti-use cases and the pros and cons of each, you don't have a intelligent opinion, you have a religious one, and there's no place for that in IT, none. And, try to decide based on consensus, but the leaders should make the decision and own it. They need to be accountable. And then just beware of any evaluation period over 30 days. That is no bueno in our experience. And if you don't have people to do it, then you should defer the evaluation. And if you have to feel like you have to do the evaluation so you can make a decision by a certain date and you're under-resourced, then that is a different conversation to have with leaders. If you're a developer and you don't love these teams, then you don't appreciate what they do because they're trying to keep you from getting into trouble. And you should like that about them. I like that about them. I love QA. I love them. I love the data team. Well, a functional data team. I hate a dysfunctional. I'll rant for a different day. I like compliance and legal. If they red flag something, they don't usually do it for a not important reason. So the rare times you need to interact with them, you should pay attention. And last but not least, requirements givers. If they're terrible requirements givers, and that's a conversation that has to be had with portfolio managers. And again, we'll talk more about that. And if you don't have a culture of automate everything, then these days with the available technology stacks and the fact that these things are cheap and easy, you should absolutely question whether that's a good thing. And then, I hate to say it, but, documentation's important. And if you disagree, go ask compliance and legal, and they'll tell you it's an absolute necessity. And then, if you're going to be agile, and I'm not saying you will, but if you choose to call yourself agile, then you actually have to be agile. Because the worst of both worlds is to be, waterfall or RUP, and call yourselves agile without actually getting any of the benefits of the agile mindset. I don't think you should, as an organization, make that decision in this is the one and only way. I think it should be part of the menu, and the decisions on the menu should be based on use cases and outcome, right? We need to turn the screws if the outcomes are bad. We need to, right? Or we need to enable people if the outcomes are bad. We need to figure out why their outcomes are bad and assist them in overcoming that. Right? Don't be punitive, be instructive. So if you're going to be agile, be agile. And I urge you to go and read the Agile Manifesto again and really pay attention to it. But if you aren't going to be agile, right? If you need to have a different process for various reasons, then do that. Be the DAO of that. We talked about the DAO package software. Be the DAO of whatever that process is. If you're going to be agile for real, then embrace the DAO of agile, which is a lot of the things we're talking about. My presumption is that you would like to be agile, or it's useful to be seen as being agile, but if you're going to be agile, be agile. That shouldn't happen too often. Half of the meetings I attend every week could have been an email. It's not a good use of anybody's time, and I'll point out that meetings are freaking expensive. It is take the average bill rate of the people attending the meeting and multiply it by the meeting time per month, and that's what that costs. And if you don't know what it costs, then how can you possibly be a good fiduciary to the business? The money is either worth spending in a meeting or it's not. Probably could have been an email, right? Ceremonies exist because we need a checkpoint or a chance to learn something, and not because we're using the XYZ methodology and they just say, have this meeting. And everybody gets on the meeting and go, what's the meeting for again? Or you invite all hands. I'm not saying all hands meetings are bad. There is a use case. If you need to tell everyone what the law is, or what a new opportunity is, or whatever, then for sure an all hands meeting is worth the investment. But all meetings should have tight agendas, and you can go and Google how to have a good meeting and it will tell you. But have an agenda, follow the agenda, have a parking lot, send a summary email, identify action items and put them in your action item management system, right? There's just a series of things that make ceremonies worthwhile. Again, automate, make decisions low. Management, care about cost. It should be part of a conversation. And it's about relative cost, right? Because we need to either make money, save money, or manage risk. And the assessment of which of those three is generally accelerated by the finance organ. And then default to yes. And if it turns out that you have capacity or whatever problems because you've said yes too often, then you need to talk about the capacity and skill building, and not about switching to no for a perfectly reasonable request because you don't have the resources to execute on. And then lastly, people need to be empowered to say no but the because no reasons have to be written down somewhere. They're not arbitrary. Just because you feel like you don't like that person's eye color, there's no reason to say no because. The because has to be defensible, and it has to be written down, and you need to tell the people who are doing various kinds of customer service, and sometimes you can say no without saying no. As a developer, right, I'll be in a meeting with the business and they'll say, it would really be great. I mean, this is great thing you built me. It's great. I love it. It's great. It's just so great. It's like the greatest thing. I'll say, well, thank you. And that lasts about a femtosecond, right? And then they say, but it would really be better. That's a new set of requirements. So you don't say no. You say, into the backlog they go. And when we next order our backlog, we'll see where that is in your overall priority. So you can say no without saying no, while still accomplishing forward moment and making the people who asked feel good about asking. People feel bad about asking. It should only be because they asked for something that's just so wrong, it's a felony, or something equally horrible. The default answer: leaders need to be accountable, or your organization's dysfunction. They need to be accountable for outcomes, first and foremost. They need to be accountable for enforcing the rules, and they need to be accountable for detecting things that are less than optimal and promoting change. And there has to be a way to get an exception or to track a problem. And the traditional way of doing that is a RAID log. And if you're not up in RAID logs, I have a link to thing. And there should be a RAID meeting, again, with the critical people attending and everybody else being an optional that can be pulled in. One of the strategies strategies we use for meetings of that kind is to say, look, I'm going to invite you to the meeting as an optional, which means you don't come, but you need to allocate this time to be pulled into the meeting if you're required, right? So you're not supposed to have another meeting or be out at this time. And if we pull you in, you should join, say your piece, and then go off into that good night. That's a really good way of balancing who needs to be in the meeting versus the people who need to be in occasionally because they have subject matter expertise. And again, there's no such thing as collective accountability. In fact, according to the United Nations, it's a war crime. So don't do it. One person needs to be accountable. And everything in the RAID log needs to be reviewed. And if something sat on there for too long, it either wasn't important, is no longer a problem, or should be moved into a decision. We made a decision on this. This is it. This is our memorial of that decision. Again, I urge you, if you are in any kind of leadership role at all, to familiarize yourself with the RAID log best practice. And the RAID log works across all of the software delivery mechanisms, right? It works on Agile, it works on SAFe, it works on RUP, it works on whatever, right? You should have a RAID log. It's the one universal ceremony that is, I think, indispensable at the middle tier leadership level. And, at the team level, I'm a big fan of the Scrum meeting, but there are rules for that, and we have a video on that you can go watch. Organization. So here's the thing. We got into this conversation about when organization came up. What do you mean organization? And they said, well, the hierarchy of the IT organization. And I'm like, well, okay, I think I see where you're going from. And then the people who are contributing, right, gave us all these examples of good patterns, bad patterns. And I said, you know what? That is sufficiently important that we should probably communicate that, and along the way communicate why that is in your experience. So we're going to try to do that. Single sources of truths and separating the doers from the governors or validators or whatever's, right? We talked about that separation of duties. Single point of contact, can't overemphasize how important that is, because otherwise people are lost. And the question when you're proposing an org or an organization and you're organizing all their artifacts, then you should run it by some people outside the org to see if at a glance that makes sense to them. And if it doesn't, you haven't done a good job. And coordinators, I cannot overemphasize how important it is. And again, customer service. And, titles, I don't know what to tell you. The reason that you need a title or a title bump is you're planning to leave, or you're future-proofing your career a little, and so it's perfectly legitimate in that case to ask the title givers to match your level of accountability to your title based on industry standards or whatever. And in HR, I'm sure will tell you that, there are numerous industry schemes for titles and, probably pay grades as well. And that, if they'd only be allowed to do it that way, all things would be, easier and better. But, at the end of the day, accountability is the most important thing. So here's our suggestion. The compliance org. Larger organizational root, chief compliance officer, typically. But it could fall under finance, it could fall, whatever. But you need a compliance boss with deputies and liaisons and compliance specialists. So usually, if there are SOC specialists or ISO specialists or whatever, they report to the compliance boss and are farmed out as needed. Quality assurance and test automation group, exactly what it says, InfoSec, same, audit, we'll explain that in a bit. And then the change control board that we spoke of earlier as being the gators to releases to production of anything. Right? Like, I'm going to do this upgrade to Windows. It should go through the change control board. I'm going to ship the next version of Foo 1.7.3. It should go through the change control board, and the compliance organization should own the change control board. But it's a cross-functional team with members from all over. It's a virtual thing. And all of the different compliance areas, if you need more areas than this, then that's totally great. But I'm saying if it's about verification and validation that we're adhering to compliance and our standards for quality and tempo, it should fall under one compliance boss. And they can have people under them that run, the subject matter areas, but should be one. And when compliance is split across more than one, then what happens is dysfunction. And so this may seem counterintuitive, but successful organizations follow some flavor of this pattern. So here's a typical IT audit team, which is, by the way, usually temporary and rotational, except for the permanent auditors. And you spin up an audit because you need to audit the XYZ program, or you need to audit our cloud costs, or you need to audit blah, blah, blah. And usually the audits are asked for by either the compliance boss following SOX or ISO or something. We need to do these audits as a process. And the outcomes are shortfalls, achievements, and recommendations. The infrastructure org. The infrastructure in its entirety, including all the box software and all that good stuff, needs to be under one single person. Because if they're not, what happens is chaos. And I put some notes on this that you can read, but ultimately, you're going to have conflicts between these groups, what they want to do, what they need to do, what they've been asked to do by their partners in, say, the development organization, and it needs to roll up to one person who says, based on the evidence, this is going to be our policy, and then we're going to write it down and promulgate it to everyone where everyone can see it. And if that still ends up being a blocker, it can get escalated, to the C circle. But generally speaking, it's not necessary. Everything in engineering is a trade-off. And so, the cloud group and the networking group could be in conflict, and they both could be right from their point of view, but it's a trade-off decision that needs to be made with accountability, and so that can go up to the infrastructure boss. Or, he can say, or she can say, let the deputy chair that. And if it has to come to me, right, I can think of myself of 2 or 3 different organizations I've worked for in the not too distant past, where this dysfunction has shown up, and to the detriment. Like, it has to go all the way to the CIO to get adjudicated, and the CIO's got better things to do and may not understand the nuances of the decision, right? So, development org. You need a development boss, and you need portfolio management, and you need release managers, right, who are going to be cross-functional team members on the release review board, right, or the change management board, or whatever you want to call it. And there should be an ARB that's virtual, again, cross-functional across all of IT. And this is the org responsible for delivering customized box solutions and custom software. Not necessarily operating it, but delivering it. And this is a lesson I have learned incredibly painfully over 40 years. Ultimately, there needs to be a human who has budget authority, who can break ties and arbitrate requirements conflicts. Now, they don't have to be in the day-to-day, right? The product owners or, subject matter experts or whatever you want to call them, the requirements givers, should roll up to this person ideally, or they should roll up in a dotted line, and then whoever the budget holder is gets the one and only vote, right? Everything else should be done, collegiately based on consensus. But if they're absolutely positively needs to be a this or that and they're mutually exclusive, then there needs to be one executive sponsor that can be briefed tersely and then say, as part of the overall business strategy for the business, which is stated by the CEO and their team, I have decided that we're going to do this, not that. Thus endeth the conversation. And when that doesn't exist, what you end up with is ping pong requirements, and the thing you ship is got off. And I'll tell you, a lot of the time, it is because we've had an epic fail in another part of the IT organization, which we will get to shortly. So what does portfolio management do? Well, they subsume all these roles, and it doesn't matter what their title is, right? Their job is to align the business requirements to the development organization so that software ships at the required quality bar, at the required tempo. That's the outcome for them. And they help keep people organized, and they help keep people's eyes on the outcome. And they can be at different levels of capability depending whether they're embeds in a team or they're at a higher level, managing several related software products that all are for the benefit of a particular part of the business organization, right? Typically, that's how you roll up portfolios. Or, maybe you have a super strategic portfolio or whatever, however you want to organize it. But portfolio managers are people that understand how to manage software projects. They know how to manage resources, time, and money, otherwise known as the iron triangle. If you're interviewing one of these people and you go, what is the iron triangle? And they go, what? Then they're not for you. Or, some variation thereof. Like if you ask them, what are the 3 most important things that you're responsible to manage? And they'll tell you. And those things all have feedback on each other, right? So, but the other thing is that portfolio managers, the higher you go up in that tree, the more they are responsible for some fundamental business modeling, right? So in addition to looking for reusable data components and services, right, and sharing that out, right, communicating that these things are available and you might not have to build it, Team XYZ or Team PDQ, you're just spinning up. Here is the starter kit for different pieces. This is where to get it. This is, these are the expectations. These are the standards you need to adhere to. And they give you a list. And that list can be, pinned to your corkboard and you can follow it. You can use it as a checklist that, at every discussion, at every release, you can look on that and go, oh yeah, we need to do that. But even more importantly, I cannot overstress how important this is. They need to maintain the glossary for the business, the data dictionary for all of the, the nitty-gritty things, the data elements, and the core business entities. So I'll give you the one that it's burned all of us the most in some flavor combination. It is, what is a customer? Whoa, customers, they get custom stuff and they're immersed. No. So defining what a customer is and then what the flavor variance on a customer is. And why do we have a flavor variance? Because we need to have a slightly different business rule or flow of execution. If we cannot agree what fundamentally a customer is, or a project or an order or whatever, right? If we can't, these top level business things that express what the business does in such a way that the output of that is and then equals profit, then you're in a lot of trouble. So the most intelligent place to put that turns out to be portfolio management, which is new to a lot of people, but it's that business value in these 3 bullets is essentially hard to, it's easy to undervalue. And when it doesn't happen, it's hard to measure the damage it does to the organization, because then eventually PDQ will have to integrate to XYZ and it won't freaking work because the definitions in the glossary of the base entities and the resulting data dictionary don't freaking match at all. They don't match in shape. They don't match in cardinality. They don't match in intention. And if you want to learn more about that, you can go look at our videos on domain-driven design. Eric Evans's genius idea. Here's the development org, right? We've got a portfolio boss, and their job is to make sure that all the portfolio owners are doing their job. And then a portfolio owner will, have project managers or scrum masters. It doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter what you call them. But people whose job it is for Project A is to make sure that Project A is delivering at the required quality bar on the needed cadence, which I call tempo. You'll hear that in my other videos, tempo. So here's a typical, cross-functional team for a development organization. And, not all the people have to be full-time. And in some cases, some of the roles like the business requirement givers or the DevOps engineers may be pushed down into the development teams. It doesn't really matter as long as all of these functions are being executed. And, so typically here's what a development team looks like, right? You need a team lead. That's typically the technical team lead. And you need the scrum master, and then you need developers and QAs, and then specialists. So specialists might include an architect dedicated to the team, or a fractional architect that's in use that you can call upon to help you solve design and architecture problems, or to give guidance. Could be a DBA. It could be whatever. This is not news to anyone, I hope. I will say this, when this came up, people kept saying this over and over again. It's like, I work for this company and I find out that Jane is an architect, and I go, what does Jane do? Oh, Jane does that. That's amazing. I wish I'd known about Jane. Jane would be cool to talk to. Look, if you have so many little puddles of architects, they never talk to each other, you're not going to get the enterprise benefit you hope for. And if collaboratively the group is always at odds with each other, it means that they don't understand the business and technology goals and need to be straightened out. So, if that's the case, then that's bad news, Dad. I don't know how else to say it. Measuring outcomes. We just did a video on DORA. It talks about outcome management along the 3 dimensions of goodness. Please go watch it. And so, again, this is where to start. And as a last word, I'll say resistance is damage. If people say no and they don't add a because, or they do add a because and the because is I said so, that's dysfunction. It's resistance. I don't know any other way to say it. We must eliminate as much friction as we can, unless it absolutely must exist. So an example of something that must exist is the release management board, or release control board, or the, production blah, blah, blah board. I don't care what you call it, but that's one gate that's probably non-negotiable. We need to trust but verify, enable self-service, and allow the insides of these organizations or sub-organizations that we propose to reorganize according to change. We need to institutionally and collectively ask, how does it end? And always have success criteria. And customer service is never a negotiable. Thank you for your kind attention.